Now, there's a very interesting tweet from Matt Godwin on Twitter, which points out that when it comes to people in the academia, overwhelmingly, they're left wing. And when you look at right wingers in the academia, it goes into the number of 1 to 5%. So the poll itself doesn't really explain why this is. And what's really interesting is to see people just take their own opinion on it. And you have individuals saying intelligent folk tend to have more left wing views. Well argued, Matt. A point well made. I think this simply illustrates that those who are educated enough to stop and think about things properly quickly realize that right wing politics harm society. This is not to say that many less educated individuals don't, of course. And almost like overwhelmingly, if you scroll down, every single person is saying the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's smart to be left wing. And I would have a question for them. How do you explain that if you go to the academia in Middle Eastern countries, like for example in Saudi Arabia or the academia in China, most people there would have nationalistic views. In fact, they would have highly extreme conservative views that you wouldn't even find acceptable in the West. So are you saying that the West is more intelligent and enlightened than the rest of the world? Do you want to go on record claiming that? Is this what you think? Because, yikes. And not only that, like if you go through history, you would see that people in academia 50 or 60 years ago used to have very conservative views. As a matter of fact, it's highly interesting that in Romania, before World War II, there were university professors that were right-wing authoritarians, so kind of like Nazis, I guess. There were university professors advocating for fascism, and there were university professors advocating for communism. So in the past, when you actually had academic freedom and people could express themselves any way they wanted, well, you had a various degree of views. Nowadays, it's a symbol that you don't have academic freedom when you see a chart like this. And if I were to see like every single university professor on the right as well, so if this chart was reversed, it would also symbolize that you don't have academic freedom. In fact, there were university professors and famous authors in Romania who, before World War II, they were staunchly anti-communist, and they had entire papers advocating on why communism is horrible and the atrocities that go on in the Soviet Union. And after communism, like literally the moment the Red Army comes, they start advocating on why communism is great and why we need to all get together and have equality and give back to the people and equity and all that type of stuff. And my father also told me about his university. There was this professor, and she used to be an informant. She would go around and rat people to the secret police, people who had problematic thoughts, were committing thought crime. I mean, all those people would be ratted out to the dean so that they get expelled from the university. And then the revolution happens, and now you have capitalism coming on, like we overthrew communism. And she becomes an economic teacher, and all of a sudden she is all about liberty and human rights and talks about the importance of civic duty and civic activities and blah, 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 blah. So she does a complete 180, and she was so staunch that she didn't want a single student to leave her class without knowing what civic responsibilities are and why it's important to have human rights and what are the human rights and so on and so forth. So it goes to show that universities can be corrupt. And I generally don't understand why people can't think so. I mean, everyone knows that people can be corrupt. Like, you would look at a police officer, and the idea of a corrupt cop isn't something that blows the mind of the target audience. The idea of a corrupt politician isn't something that blows the mind of the target audience. But when you say on Twitter, hey, do you know that the university can be corrupt? Oh, no. Oh, how dare you? Like, no. It's almost like there's a deity, like Akademos, and he looks over this institution, and it's impossible to have corruption. It's almost like the idea that people can be fired from university for wrong opinions, which have absolutely nothing to do with what they're teaching, doesn't exist. I mean, you have a Nobel Prize winner which a couple of years ago got fired for a sexist joke. And it wasn't even that sexist. Like, it was that of an issue. He said something like, women don't belong in the lab because you can fall in love with them. I mean, it was like a cringe boomer thing to say. And this man is very intelligent. I mean, he's a Nobel Prize winner. And the media went ham on him. They raked him over the coals to the point where he lost his job. And I believe now he's working in Japan. So the United States can't benefit from his wisdom and findings because now he's in Japan. And then you have the Lysenko thing, which happened in the Soviet Union, where Lysenko came up with the idea that evolution doesn't exist, and the Nazis came out with this principle. And he believed that socialism is such a good ideology that even plants know about it. So if you have like the same class of plants planted really close one to one another, they're going to collaborate and they're going to share resources, and you don't need fertilizer, and it's going to increase the crops because now you can plant the plants very closely. And the problem was that people at the time didn't really understand. I mean, the peasants at least, they didn't understand science, but they knew you need to plant the plants away from one another so that their roots don't get tangled. Now, the peasant doesn't know, like, he doesn't know the scientific explanation of why if you plant plants too close to each other, they wither and die. But they knew that, well, if you plant them away from each other, they grow well, right? So he didn't know about the roots. But because Lysenko had this idea that you can plant the plants very close to one another, the government loved this. I mean, Stalin loved this because it's like, okay, so we can increase our crop production. If you can plant the plants close to one another, then you can plant more on the same amount of land. So they promote him. Everyone that disagrees with him gets fired. And then there's a famine in the USSR because people applied his findings, which were absolute horseshit. So the idea that the government can impose itself in institutions, especially in academia, has happened throughout human history. I mean, the Nazis did the same. It's happening now. And when you see something like this, like when you see the political compass of a large enough group of people and all of them veer to the left except like 10%, yeah, there is no academic freedom. It's the paradox of conformity. Because you would think like the more you have conformity, the more you have consensus, the paradox of consensus, sorry. The more you have consensus, the more you get to the truth. In reality, human beings aren't like that. So if you have like 100 people in a room and you ask them a question and they all respond the same, then probably there is some duress over there. Probably there is a pressure for them to conform. Unless the question is like completely obvious, like you hold a red handkerchief and everyone says, oh yeah, that's red. But if you ask them something like, hey, do you think we should pay more taxes to the government? I mean, obviously, like some people will answer yes, some people will answer no if you really have like a random sample of 100 people. But if everyone answers the same thing, then already you need to start questioning. It's like, okay, well, maybe the sampling size is wrong. Like maybe the person that got those 100 people were all from universities. So let me know what you guys think. I found this to be absolutely ridiculous. And I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.